Okay, good morning. We're going to start the webinar now. This webinar is entitled Universal Waste Rules for Mercury. It's part of the Businesses Preventing Pollution web series, or webinar series, sorry. We've had 8 webinars so far, and we will have one more. So this is the second to last webinar in the series. The next one will be next Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. and it is on rainwater harvesting. So if you'd like to see any of the archived webinars, you can see them on our website, www.ci.superior.wi.us/business. You can also visit our blog, superiorstormwater.blogspot.com, or you can go to our YouTube page. Just go to YouTube and search City of Superior Environmental Services. You can see any of our archived webinars from this series or the Environmental Matters webinar series in those locations. So we'll get started. First of all, we'll just do a quick overview of what universal waste is. So according to the EPA, universal wastes are batteries, pesticides, bulbs or lamps, and mercury-containing equipment. So the reason that we have universal waste regulations is to streamline hazardous waste. So basically all of these things are hazardous wastes, but they're so widely generated that they're considered universal wastes and have a separate regulation just so that they can be dealt with more easily. So the EPA regulates collection and management to ensure proper collection, recycling, and treatment of universal wastes. It makes it easier for municipalities and businesses to create collections programs. So even though they are hazardous wastes, they're not dealt with in the same ways that all hazardous wastes are because they are so widely generated. Basically, the EPA set aside these different regulations for universal wastes in order to make it easier for more people to collect them because they were concerned that these things would end up in the trash otherwise. So they're really just trying to make it easier on municipalities and businesses to promote recycling of these things. And a lot of the products that these universal wastes are in, they don't really seem hazardous. Like, you know, if you have a hazardous chemical in your home or something, some sort of cleaner, it would have lots of warnings on it and things like that. Whereas, you know, if you have a light bulb that's a fluorescent light bulb, you're not going to necessarily think of that as hazardous. So that's where, you know, some of the danger in disposal lies, is that people may not know that it's dangerous or hazardous. Okay, so some more about the program. States can create their own programs for universal waste as long as they are equivalent to the EPA's regulations. And the reason for that is because there is a law in place that's more stringent than the universal waste regulations. So RCRA, the Resources Conservation and Recovery Act, it covers disposal of solid waste, and that's more strict than the universal waste regulations, which is why states are allowed to create their own programs. States are also allowed to have additional regulations if they would like. So Wisconsin also separately regulates thermostats from other mercury-containing devices. So even though mercury-containing thermostats have mercury in them, they're regulated separately as are bulbs or lamps. As of 2008, there was a memo from the Wisconsin DNR that Wisconsin was also using their enforcement discretion to regulate other mercury items and antifreeze as universal waste. So, those are just some extras from Wisconsin. So mercury-containing equipment, before we really get into the universal waste information, we're just going to talk for just a little bit about why mercury-containing equipment is hazardous and why it is a universal waste. Well, the reason for this is that when it's landfilled or put in the garbage, it can break, and then the mercury vapors can end up being breathed in. Mercury is released by power plants a lot of the time through the burning of coal, so it gets out into the environment anyway. And basically when it's in the water and then we eat the fish that have the mercury in them, it bioaccumulates in fish. So as we eat those fish, then we're exposed, but also breathing it in would be really bad as well. So what mercury does to fish is it can actually cause fish mortality, but it can affect human nervous systems, brain, heart, kidney, lungs. It can also cause impaired development in fetuses. We have a lot more information about this in a webinar that was from the Environmental Matters webinar series on October 9th. So you can view that as well if you would like some more information about that. And there's information all over the internet about different problems caused by mercury, so you can check out the EPA's website as well, or a lot of different places have information about it. So let's talk more about mercury-containing equipment. Basically, the EPA's definition of mercury-containing equipment is a device or part of a device that contains elemental mercury integral to its function. So if it has mercury in it and it needs mercury in it in order to work, then it's universal waste, or it's mercury-containing equipment. Batteries and lamps or bulbs are not included, and that's because they're regulated separately as universal waste. So some examples of mercury-containing equipment: auto switches, barometers, thermostats, manometers, temperature and pressure gauges, and mercury switches. So by auto switches, what we mean is like they're usually used in hood and trunk lighting, so that when you open the hood or you open the trunk, the light turns on. That usually contains mercury, or will contain mercury sometimes. So we'll talk a little bit about the organizations that deal with mercury universal waste. So handlers. Handlers are organizations that generate, transport, or store universal waste. So here at the wastewater treatment plant, we would be considered a handler because we accept people's universal waste, but we don't actually treat the universal waste. We don't actually get rid of it. So if you have like compact fluorescent light bulbs, you could bring them here, we would store them, and then they would go on to someone else to be disposed of. Organizations that dispose of, treat, or recycle universal waste are destination facilities. That's the MPCA's definition, but it's widely applicable. There are also transporters of universal waste, and that's just what it sounds like, and transfer facilities of universal waste. So we'll talk about different information with small and large quantity handlers. A lot of their requirements are pretty similar, but we'll talk first about what is different. So small versus large quantity handlers. Small quantity handlers can have no more than 5,000 kilograms or about 11,000 pounds on site at any time, and that's all universal waste. That's not, 11,000 pounds of bulbs, 11,000 pounds of thermostats. It's 11,000 at one time. They don't need an EPA ID number, and there are no manifest requirements. So we'll talk about that for a second. A manifest is a shipping document for hazardous waste, and the document travels with the waste, and it's signed off by each step in the process. So if it starts here, we would sign it and keep a copy, and then the person who drives it to the next place would sign it and keep a copy, and then so on and so forth until it's disposed of. But small quantity handlers don't have to have a manifest. They do have to have basic training for their employees on dealing with universal waste. Large quantity handlers can have more than 5,000 kilograms or 11,000 pounds on site. There's not really a specific amount for how high it can go. It's just anything greater than 5,000 kilograms. They do need an EPA ID number. They have to keep basic shipping records, so whereas the small quantity handlers don't have to have a manifest, the large quantity handlers do have to keep track of where things are going and when. They have to have basic training for their employees, and it's said on the EPA website specific to their responsibilities. So if you have someone who's going to be dealing with the universal waste a lot, maybe you would train them more in how to handle it than you would someone who's not dealing with it at all. So we'll talk about some of the other requirements for handlers. And actually, I think this is true for, it says small handlers, but that's also true for large handlers. They must manage universal waste mercury-containing equipment in a way that prevents release of any universal waste of a component of a universal waste to the environment. So basically, they have to be careful with it and make sure that the universal waste mercury, or the mercury in the universal waste, is not getting out into the environment. So that's what it is in general for large and small quantity handlers. I don't know why it only says small there. Some other requirements for actually handling them. They need to place leaking or potentially leaking mercury devices in a container that will prevent the release of mercury. So that's pretty straightforward. You know, if something's leaking, you put it in a container that's not going to leak so that the mercury won't get out. And then this next bit we'll talk about removing ampules. And what ampules are just sealed vials with mercury in them. That's it. It's pretty basic. So you can only remove them from the device if they won't break during removal, if they're only over a containment device, and you have to have a cleanup system ready for spills and in a well-ventilated and monitored area. So basically you don't want to be trying to pull an ampule out of something and have it break and then not have some way to collect the mercury and be in an area where, you know, you're going to breathe a lot of it in or something. You want to make sure that all these requirements are met so that if something does go wrong, that you can, you know, still contain the mercury pretty quickly. Some more requirements for removing ampules. The employees handling them have to be trained. You have to have non-leaking containers for storage. That's pretty obvious. And they should be packaged so that they don't break. Even if the containers aren't going to leak, you still don't want them all to break. So you need to be really careful packaging them. And that's just a picture there of what an ampule would look like. So if you have mercury-containing devices that don't have ampules, they just have mercury in there in some other format, you can remove the housing around the mercury only if it's immediately sealed in an airtight container. And then you follow the rest of the requirements for the waste with ampules, like having good ventilation, having a spill system set up in place, things like that. So now we'll talk about labeling mercury containers. So that's just how to deal with it overall, but there are some specific labeling requirements for universal waste, and this is what a label could look like. So labeling mercury-containing universal waste. So you can label the devices or the containers that they're stored in. So say you have a bunch of compact fluorescent light bulbs, you wouldn't have to put a label on every single one of them, but you could put them all in one container and then put a label on the outside. That would be acceptable. So what you would say is universal waste mercury-containing equipment. If you had a bunch of different things that had mercury in them just in a box, universal waste mercury-containing equipment. Or you could say waste mercury-containing equipment or used mercury-containing equipment. So let's say you had a box with only thermostats in it. You could say universal waste mercury thermostats, waste mercury thermostats, or used mercury thermostats. So there's a little bit of leeway on how you label them, but you do want to have, you know, waste, used, or universal waste, and then what's in it labeled right on the box or on the equipment. The other thing that you need to do is keep information about the date that it was received. So small and large quantity handlers aren't supposed to have the universal waste on site for more than a year. They're supposed to keep it for only a year, except for if they can prove that that they had to keep accumulating it in order for it to be disposed of. So if you had like 2 light bulbs and you needed to package a box of 10 light bulbs in order to ship it to someone who was going to dispose of it, then if you could prove that you had to do that, you could keep it on site for more than a year. But otherwise, it's supposed to only be there for a year. So you do have to keep track of the date that it was received or generated on your site. So if you had a light bulb burn out on November 13th, you would need to mark that on the light bulb or on the container that it was going into. So there are a few ways to do it where you can either, mark the container with the earliest date. So if the first light bulb burnt out on the 13th of November, 2013, then that's what you would mark on the box, and then it would need to be disposed of by that date a year later, even if the rest of them were generated after that. Anything else that went into the box was generated after that. So that's one way to do it. Another way is to label each one individually. Another thing you can do is keep inventory. So, just keep a file on your computers about when each thing was generated, things like that. So basically, it's sort of up to you how to keep those records, but you have to be able to prove that it's only been there for a year, or that you have a good reason for keeping it there for longer than a year. So that's pretty much it for labeling. So we'll talk quick about some recycling locations. That's just a picture of our plant because we are one of the locations where you can bring mercury-containing devices. So mercury-containing devices can be brought here to the wastewater treatment plant. We're at 51 East 1st Street in Superior, Wisconsin. If you would like more information, you can call 715-394-0392. We're open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. If you have any questions, give us a call, like I said, or just stop by and ask us. If you bring in a mercury-containing thermostat, we will give you a mercury-free thermostat. So we have a bunch of them to give away for free. So if you have anything that you want to bring in that has mercury in it, you can come get your free mercury-free thermostat. Another contact for businesses and other organizations is the Northwest Clean Sweep Program. Their phone number is 715-635-2197. They do hazardous waste collections around Northwest Wisconsin. And then earth911.com actually has a really nice search feature where you can select what you're trying to dispose of, and they'll give you locations near you where you can recycle them or dispose of them. So it's a really good resource if you are looking for some place to get rid of universal waste. And that is the end of our webinar. So thank you for watching. Again, this was part of the Businesses Preventing Pollution webinar series. Next Wednesday at 9:30, that's November 20th, we have a webinar on rainwater harvesting. So you can tune in for that if you'd like to register. It's www.ci.superior.wi.us/business. Again, that same website, you can see our archived webinars, but you can also see them on YouTube, on our blog, and they are on various pages in the website. So if you're looking for something, like if you want more information about rain gardens, for example, if you searched rain gardens and went to the rain gardens page, the webinar would be embedded in that page, or there would be a link to the webinar on that page. So you can check out any of our webinars and feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thank you.